The Young and the Restless spoilers. Phyllis Summers had always believed that motherhood did not end when a child turned 18 or even when they became a grown adult with a life of their own. For Phyllis, motherhood was an instinct as natural as breathing, a reflex that tightened its grip the moment she sensed danger approaching the people she loved. And in Genoa City, where temptation lurked behind polished glass doors, where secrets clung to the air thicker than perfume, where every smile hid a motive, danger was never far. So when the whispers began about Daniel Romalotti Jr. becoming fixated on a woman who not only belonged to someone else but was known for her complicated emotional baggage, Phyllis felt that familiar fire rise inside her. It was not judgment, she told herself. It was protection. It was the duty of a mother who had already witnessed her children fall into heartbreak too many times to count. And so, when she heard Tessa Porter's name mentioned with increasing frequency around her son, Phyllis knew she had to act before Daniel crossed a line he would regret. Daniel, in Phyllis's eyes, had always been the sensitive one. The child who carried emotional storms beneath a quiet surface, the man who often tried to fix what was broken in others while ignoring the fractures inside himself. His marriage to Heather had been a painful lesson in how quickly stability could collapse, and his rebound relationships had only reinforced his tendency to fill emotional voids with the wrong people. And now, as rumors swirled that he was inching dangerously close to Tessa, married, devoted, but lost in her own struggles, Phyllis recognized the pattern. Daniel was drawn to women with wounds, women with stories, women who fed his desire to rescue someone even though no one had ever truly rescued him. Phyllis believed that Tessa was not malicious, but she was vulnerable, and vulnerable people made messy choices. Phyllis would not allow her son to become collateral damage in someone else's unresolved chaos. Not again. Not this time. Not while she was still standing. But life in Genoa City had a way of punishing anyone who dared believe they could control the narrative. On the afternoon Phyllis decided to confront the growing situation, she found herself at the Genoa City Athletic Club, trying to catch Daniel before he disappeared into another emotional entanglement. She rehearsed her words in her head, calm, composed, measured, but she knew herself well enough to expect an explosion instead. She imagined telling Daniel that Tessa was married, that she was off limits, that this obsession would wreck lives. What she did not expect, what she could not have anticipated even with her seasoned instincts, was that fate had prepared a scene far more shocking than the confrontation she planned. As she turned down a quiet hallway near the private lounge, Phyllis heard soft laughter echoing from around the corner. Familiar voices intertwined with a warmth that immediately set off alarms in her mind. When she stepped forward, everything in her froze. There, illuminated by the dim golden lights of the club, was Daniel, leaning close to Tessa Porter, the two sharing an intimacy that made Phyllis's heart drop. Their faces were inches apart, their conversation hushed, their connection unmistakable. And then, without hesitation or restraint, Daniel leaned in and kissed Tessa. Not a hesitant brush of lips, not an innocent greeting, but a lingering, passionate kiss that revealed far more than either of them might have dared to admit aloud. It was a kiss that tasted like longing, like danger, like a promise neither of them should be making. Phyllis's breath caught. For a moment she could not move, unable to decide whether she was witnessing the beginning of an affair or the end of her son's self-control. The betrayal was not Tessa's alone. Daniel was betraying himself, his values, and the remnants of his marriage. And Phyllis, who had lived her life surrounded by scandals, who had orchestrated more chaos than most families could survive in a decade, felt a jolt of shock as if she were watching a slow-motion accident she was powerless to stop. She stumbled backward, colliding with another figure rounding the corner, Cain Ashby. Of all the people to witness her unraveling, Cain was perhaps the most unexpected. His eyebrows lifted in a mixture of curiosity and sympathy as he steadied her by the shoulders, guiding her away from the hallway before she could interrupt or embarrass herself further. Cain had seen enough in his own messy past to recognize the look in Phyllis's eyes, a blend of maternal protectiveness and uncontrollable fury. "What happened?" he asked gently, but Phyllis did not answer. She was too stunned, too emotionally overloaded to find the right words. Instead, she allowed Kane to guide her into one of the club's quieter seating areas, where the background noise could drown out the pounding of her heart. She sat heavily, her hands shaking as she replayed the kiss she had just witnessed. It had not been a misunderstanding. It had not been accidental. It was real. Kane, ever the pragmatist despite his own complicated history, read the situation before Phyllis even opened her mouth. "You saw something you didn't want to see," he said softly. "Something about Daniel." Phyllis exhaled sharply, confirmation enough. But instead of feeding her anger or encouraging her infamous tendency to storm into other people's lives, Kane surprised her. He sat beside her, calm, thoughtful, and with a level of emotional maturity that Phyllis sometimes mocked but secretly admired. He told her that children, no matter how old, had to make their own choices, even their own mistakes. That Daniel was not the fragile boy she once held but a grown man capable of deciding who he loved and why. That interfering might not prevent heartbreak but might instead push Daniel further down the very path she was trying to block. Phyllis bristled immediately. She was not the type to sit still while her family marched toward disaster. Kane knew this. But he also knew that sometimes, the most dangerous thing a parent could do was assume they could rewrite someone else's storyline. His voice remained steady as he told her that the heart wants what it wants, and although the phrase made Phyllis roll her eyes, it struck a chord deep inside her. Kane was not dismissing her concerns, he was reminding her that Daniel deserved the dignity of making his own decisions, no matter how flawed they might be. And as painful as it was, she knew he was right. Daniel had to face whatever consequences awaited him, even if they came wrapped in forbidden kisses and unresolved feelings. But Phyllis Summers was not built to stay silent. She had spent too many years watching her children suffer because she stepped back when she should have intervened, or so she believed. And now, faced with the horrifying truth that Daniel was diving headfirst into an affair with a married woman, she felt that old fire ignite with even greater intensity. Kane's words echoed in her mind, but her instincts roared louder. She could not simply walk away, not when she had tasted the truth of what was unfolding. As she sat with Kane, still grappling with the shock, she realized something more unsettling. If she had stumbled upon that kiss so easily, someone else could have too. Word would spread. Lives would be destroyed. And Tessa, married, vulnerable, and struggling, might not be the only casualty. Mariah, Arya, Sharon, even Devon, the ripple effects would reach every corner of Genoa City. Phyllis knew chaos better than anyone, but this was not chaos she wanted for her son. This was devastation waiting to happen. And so, despite Kane's gentle warning, despite the rational voice in her mind telling her to stop, Phyllis Summers made her decision. She would intervene. She would protect Daniel, even if he resented her for it. She would confront Tessa, even if it meant igniting a firestorm. She would not sit quietly while her son stood at the edge of a cliff. Because in the end, no matter how grown he was, Daniel Romalotti Jr. was still her child. And Phyllis would burn down the world before she watched him burn himself. Phyllis Summers had never been the kind of mother who waited patiently on the sidelines. She was a force of nature, a storm that gathered intensity the moment she sensed her children drifting toward heartache, and she had spent too many years fighting for Daniel to allow him to fall into another emotional catastrophe. After witnessing the kiss between her son and Tessa Porter, fiery, reckless, and far more intimate than any innocent interaction should have been, Phyllis carried that image like a weight pressing against her chest. But as the initial shock faded, something more complicated took its place, the realization that Daniel had begun living again. After Heather's tragic death left him hollow and detached from the world, Phyllis had spent months watching her son fade into himself, functioning more like a shadow than a man. And so, even though she was furious at the situation, at the secrecy, at Tessa's impossible entanglements, there was a small part of Phyllis that felt relief. Daniel was feeling something. Wanting something. Moving toward something instead of disappearing into grief. But the line between relief and panic was razor thin, and Phyllis was no stranger to misreading that line, especially where her children were concerned. She found Daniel alone later that evening, sitting in the lobby of the Genoa City Athletic Club with a contemplative stillness that would have made any other mother approach gently. Not Phyllis. She moved toward him with her heels clicking sharply against the floor, each step fueled by a mixture of maternal instinct, fear, and the determination to set things right before they spiraled out of control. Daniel looked up just as she reached him, and for a brief moment, the soft exhaustion in his eyes reminded her of the little boy who once ran to her after every scraped knee. But now he was a man. Still vulnerable, still searching, but no longer someone she could protect with a kiss on the forehead and a reassuring smile. She sat beside him, folding her legs gracefully, masking the storm she carried under a veneer of lightness. When she first opened her mouth, she emphasized how proud she was to see him rebuilding parts of his life, how relieved she felt watching him connect with people again after months of emotional isolation. She mentioned Tessa's name carefully, easing into the subject as if she were testing the strength of a fragile bridge. She admitted, honestly, that she had once been supportive of his friendship with her, because she had seen how lonely he was after losing Heather, how badly he needed companionship, warmth, even distraction. Phyllis had viewed Tessa as a safe presence back then, someone who understood grief, who could offer empathy without threatening the thin emotional balance Daniel was clinging to. And she wasn't lying, she had truly believed the friendship was good for him. But as she continued, her tone shifted. Anyone who knew Phyllis could hear the tightening, the subtle vibration of concern threading through her words. She pointed out that there was a difference between friendship and whatever Daniel was stepping into now. She reminded him, gently at first, then with increasing firmness, that Tessa was married, that she belonged to someone who had loved her fiercely through circumstances far more complicated than most couples ever endured. Mariah Copeland had fought for Tessa more than once, fought with a devotion that Phyllis, in her rare moments of candor, actually respected. She had watched the two women overcome obstacles that would have broken most relationships: kidnapping, identity fractures, jealousy, career interference, loss, fertility struggles, and the painful emotional distance that came with Tessa's artistic pursuits. Phyllis had witnessed every high and low of their love story, often with an arched eyebrow and biting commentary, but she could not deny its depth. And because she had seen that depth, she now feared Tessa's interest in Daniel might be nothing more than an emotional reflex, a temporary escape from the overwhelming strain of motherhood, career stagnation, and personal insecurity. Phyllis laid this out carefully, understanding that Daniel was not naive but emotionally raw enough to confuse attention with meaning. She reminded him that Tessa's history suggested a pattern of running toward comfort when life became too heavy. She was not accusing Tessa of being malicious, far from it, but Phyllis had lived long enough to know that people often reached for the nearest source of warmth when they felt cold inside. Daniel, with his gentle heart and tendency to offer emotional sanctuary, was the perfect person to lean on. Too perfect. Dangerously perfect. Daniel tried to interrupt, insisting that what he felt with Tessa was more than a momentary lapse, but Phyllis pressed onward. She explained that while she was genuinely glad he was moving forward, she could not ignore the red flags waving in front of her. She saw the longing in his eyes, the bruised vulnerability beneath the surface, the pieces of himself still healing from losing Heather. She feared that Tessa might become a substitute for the life he lost, a symbolic stand-in rather than a true partner. And Phyllis, who had made more romantic mistakes than most, refused to let her son replicate the patterns she had spent years regretting. Her voice softened as she leaned closer, telling him that she did not want to clip the wings of his recovery or stifle his chance at finding love again. She simply wanted him to question whether Tessa was capable of giving him what he truly needed. Whether she could choose him fully, without hesitation, without guilt, without the shadow of Mariah's love hanging between them. Phyllis also reminded him of something he was avoiding: if Tessa crossed a line with Daniel, she was also betraying Mariah. And betrayal, in this town, always led to devastating fallout. Daniel listened more quietly than she expected. His silence was not submission but contemplation, the kind of silence that hinted at deeper conflict brewing inside him. He confessed, with some reluctance, that connecting with Tessa had made him feel alive again. Seen, valued, understood in a way he hadn't felt since before the world collapsed under the weight of Heather's illness. But the more he opened up, the clearer it became that he was still blinded by gratitude, still clinging to the lifeline Tessa represented rather than the woman herself. Phyllis placed a hand on his arm, firm but tender, reminding him that moving forward did not mean leaping into the arms of the first person who made him feel again. Progress could be fragile, misleading, full of emotional rebound traps. She told him that she believed in his ability to love again, truly love, deeply love, but she feared Tessa might only be passing through his life rather than meant to stay in it. And the last thing she wanted was for Daniel to rebuild himself around someone who was already half belonging to another life. Still, even as she warned him, Phyllis could not deny that glimmer of pride blooming quietly inside her. Her son was standing, breathing, choosing again. He had not surrendered to grief. He was trying. That alone was something she cherished more than anything she could articulate. But love, in Genoa City, was always a battlefield. And if Daniel insisted on stepping into one, Phyllis fully intended to make sure he wasn't walking in blind. Because Phyllis Summers never let her children fall. Not without trying to catch them first, and not without making sure they knew exactly what cost awaited them on the other side of desire. Phyllis Summers had always believed that the universe offered second chances, new beginnings, and fresh paths for those courageous, or reckless, enough to take them. But she also believed, fiercely and unapologetically, that her children deserved the best of those opportunities. That was why, after her conversation with Daniel, she still felt a gnawing unease deep beneath her ribs. He had listened, yes, and he had acknowledged her concerns, but she had seen the faraway look in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, the stubbornness he inherited straight from her. He was not letting go of Tessa Porter. Not now. Not after the spark that kiss had awakened in him. And that terrified her. So Phyllis shifted tactics. Not out of manipulation, she told herself, but out of necessity. She brought up, as casually as any mother could when discussing forbidden romance, that there were still plenty of fish in the sea, emphasizing each word with a deliberate softness meant to hide the steel underneath. She painted an image for Daniel. A world full of possibilities, a sea filled with women who were single, stable, emotionally available, and capable of loving him without the complications of existing vows or entangled histories. She reminded him that Genoa City alone held more women than he could ever meet in a lifetime, and beyond Genoa City, an entire world waited. Why, she asked, would he anchor himself to someone whose heart was already spoken for? Why would he risk another emotional collapse for a love that came tethered to guilt? Daniel smiled politely, but Phyllis recognized pity when she saw it. He appreciated her concern, yes, but he was not absorbing a single word. His heart was already drifting toward a woman who could not fully return it, and no amount of parental wisdom would change his trajectory. And if there was one thing Phyllis Summers refused to do, it was sit back and watch disaster unfold in slow motion. She realized quickly that talking to Daniel alone would not be enough. If he would not protect himself, she would have to intervene from another angle. Phyllis knew that confronting Tessa would require an entirely different approach. She could not storm in with accusations or threats, not because she lacked the nerve, but because Tessa was not her enemy. Tessa was complicated, sensitive, vulnerable, and capable of emotional messiness, yes, but she was not malicious. She was torn. She was confused. She was lonely. And Phyllis understood that loneliness more intimately than she ever cared to admit. So instead of attacking Tessa, she planned to appeal to her conscience. Before approaching her, Phyllis spent a long night pacing her condo, mentally rehearsing every possible outcome. In the glow of her dimly lit living room, she analyzed Tessa's patterns over the years. The commitment issues, the push and pull with Mariah, the emotional detours that led her into dangerous and self-sabotaging behavior. She thought of the fertility complications, the strain of raising Arya, the guilt Tessa still carried about not always being the partner Mariah deserved. Phyllis pieced together each of these truths the way a strategist assembles a blueprint. And when the sun rose, she had her plan. She would talk to Tessa not as an adversary, but as a mirror. When Phyllis found her later that day, Tessa was sitting at crimson lights, staring into her coffee as though the steam itself held all the answers she couldn't reach. The hesitation in Tessa's posture, the way she twisted her wedding ring, the way her foot tapped nervously beneath the table, told Phyllis everything she needed to know. Tessa was drowning in confusion. Perfect. That meant she was still reachable.